Good morning, welcome. Thanks for joining us for Jumpstart's first State of AI quarterly webinar of 2024. I'm Lauren Smith-Petta, and I serve as Jumpstart's Director of Education. With the landscape of AI in such a rapidly evolving state, these quarterly sessions are focused on the highlights and headlines of AI, what you need to know in 30 minutes, and how to successfully and ethically apply these tools to your business today. Jumpstart offers another webinar series on a different topic every month, along with a variety of other educational programs and events. Visit jumpstartinc.org/smallbiz to explore our services. Before I introduce our presenter today, a few obligatory housekeeping items. This presentation session is a mere 30 minutes. Another 30 minutes will be set aside for the Q&A portion. In your toolbar, you should be able to see an important communication tool at your disposal today, the Q&A. You can put your questions in the Q&A as they occur to you. If they are time sensitive, we'll address them at that time. Otherwise, Brad will address them at the end. At the end of today's session and in a follow-up email, you'll receive a brief survey. We appreciate your feedback. It allows us to continue to bring in experts to teach you these valuable lessons. All right, without further ado, allow me to introduce our esteemed AI expert and presenter today, Bradley Reynolds. Bradley is a recognized leader in the AI industry with a deep understanding of the transformative power of large language models, or LLMs, and generative AI. As the Senior Vice President of Artificial Intelligence at Expedient, Bradley spearheads efforts to simplify the operational deployment of private AI infrastructure for enterprise, given strict data governance and regulatory requirements. So whether you understood all the fancy jargon or not, I can promise you're learning from the expert today. So Brad, welcome back.
Thanks a lot, Lauren. So before kind of delving into this presentation, a lot of the information in this one is going to be based off of learnings from clients and other small, medium, and large-sized businesses. And this one's going to be focused a little more on the business owner as opposed to the end user in terms of what are the first steps that you can take relative to AI to start delivering value. So as in short order, and as we're going to be doing this in 2024 on a quarterly basis as Jumpstart, hopefully this topic of delivering value in 90 days from AI will result in some successes by the time that we talk in the next kind of the next presentation. And then as Lauren also mentioned, normally we do the Q&A at the end, but if you see something that you want to stop on or a slide and you want to comment, I'm happy to address your questions in line if that makes sense. So I wanted to roll over some kind of 5 truths that we found in our customer conversations and just general market conversations, is that we're at a strategic inflection point for a business. So that now's the time to start kind of grasping AI, experimenting with it. Most folks are at very early innings here. So it's a learning and experimenting and trying and failing and kind of learning from those failure spots. But on the second point, kind of the big piece about AI is just using chat is a great starting point, but the real value from an enterprise organization level is that you're sitting on large amounts of data that helps you onboard employees, data that helps you understand your customers and your sales reps. And the reality is no individual in the company can understand all of that data. And so AI coupled with kind of the institutional data you have at your company is how you unlock the long-term value. Third truth point is just by implementing chat responsibly across your organization as wide as you can and empowering your workforce to be able to use chat tools, there are studies out there that say you're going to get an efficiency gain or improvement from your knowledge workers about 25%. So that's like a real easy low-hanging fruit to implement. But compared to that or related to that and some of the other points is that if you implement it wrong, and so implementing wrong could be like implementing chat without the appropriate controls and audit on top of it, there's consequences. And some of the consequences could be really significant, like information from your company leaking out to the open internet, private things, trade secrets, those types of things. And the reality of the situation is, whether as a business owner or a domain expert inside of your organization, our thought is try and get folks to use chat ubiquitously. But if you're not comfortable with that and you need the policies and frameworks and controls in place, the reality is the cat's already out of the bag. Your employees are already using AI in their day-to-day. So it's important to get control and kind of grasp around that. So a question that all organizations need to ask themselves is do you want to be a laggard or a leader? And this is a continuum, so it's not necessarily a binary question. But with AI right now, you have the opportunity to kind of choose a path. You can wait and see, wait for other folks like your company to implement AI and then kind of try and duplicate some of that stuff, or you can take the earlier, kind of first mover advantage. And in terms of like some of the evolutions that we've seen in our lifetime, PCs, internet, mobile, and then today generative AI are all inflection points that differentiated companies that adopted them from not. And so at the bottom, you see there's some companies that saw inflection points but weren't able to adapt. Like Blockbuster missed streaming. They had the ability to buy Netflix and didn't do it. Toys R Us missed e-commerce. Kodak missed digital photography, and Nokia missed the smartphone. And these are some of the smartest, well-informed companies that kind of missed that inflection point. So the question for your business, or even you as an individual, is, do you want to be a laggard or a leader when it comes to AI? Because it's happening, and it's our advice would be to kind of get out in front of all of that stuff. Onto the data point, the thought is that all of the answers you need to become a better business, to become a better kind of individual knowledge worker, already exist inside of data in your company. The question is how do you connect AI to that data? And that's something that'll happen over the course of the next couple of years. But first, you want to get people experienced with AI through chat tools. And then you figure out, okay, well, the real value is, how do I get answers to my data, answers out of my data easily, and where does that infrastructure live? So as I encourage basic adoption, kind of a phase 2 is, how do I kind of connect that to data sources that I have internally to help my employees leverage the answers that we already have. But there's a lot of challenges in terms of getting to AI insights. It can take a long time to start extracting value in terms of figuring out how to connect to all of your data sources. You have to have experience in terms of implementing data stores, and data can exist all over your organization, whether they're in flat files or databases or in SaaS services. You need kind of policy around that, and there could be significant kind of CapEx barriers to implementing a lot of this stuff at the early stage. And let alone the fact that there's probably not folks inside of your company concentrating 100% of their time on AI to become AI experts. There's just a lot of gaps there in terms of extracting value from AI today. And this presentation is all around how do we kind of extract value from AI in the early stage and then kind of build from that. So there's a study that I cited earlier in terms of efficiency gains. And so there's a Harvard and Boston Consulting Group study where BCG took 10% of their 8,000 person workforce, so 800 employees, and just gave them access to public AI chat tools. They didn't connect it to any internal data. They just gave them access to kind of the basic building blocks. And you can see the numbers here. It's a huge efficiency gain, huge quality gain. And that's kind of like the tip of the iceberg in terms of the gains that BCG can get long term. So if you think about BCG, they're a consulting firm, and they have, I don't know how old they are, 50 years, maybe even more, of all of these client engagements that they have had and all of the data that's come out of those client engagements. It's a huge, interesting proprietary data source that as they hire new associates, those associates can start tapping into that corporate identity, that corporate DNA, that corporate knowledge, and use that to leverage future engagements. So, but just with the absolute basics, they're, they already saw very large gains. So we focus on stuff like this in terms of how do you start extracting gains as soon as possible with the least amount of work across your organization. But if you see that stat, you're like, okay, well, why hasn't every company does it? Why hasn't Jumpstart implemented across the board? Why haven't all the law firms implemented across the board? Why haven't Fortune 500 companies implemented across the board? There are issues. There are policy issues. There's questions I mentioned earlier about, are we going to leak private data out? How do we integrate these types of tools into some sort of an auditing authentication mechanism so that we understand how our employees are using it? And specifically, if we have an AI policy internally, how do we know that we have the technology in place to enforce that policy on the employees? It's also not tailored to your own internal information. It's pretty expensive. So there's a lot of blocks after you say, hey, we've seen the value that AI just chat tools can offer, but we need to kind of satisfy some requirements to square policy with the actual technological ability to enforce that policy. So this is a slide of some observations that we've seen out in the market. So in terms of enterprises or even small businesses adopting AI tools, it's really, really early innings in terms of folks are still trying to figure out policies and procedures. Very few people are actually implementing things kind of enterprise-wide yet. But we also see a set of we'll call it procedures or ways that companies, this is usually on the larger end, are approaching AI problems. And so what we find out in the market is that folks are assigning AI ideas to the smartest technological team inside of the company. It's like, hey, you're smart at tech, figure out AI, figure out where we can implement this inside of our organization to make big impacts that move the needle in 2024, 2025. The problem with that approach is that you're taking, in programming verbiage, like a waterfall kind of approach, where you're building a long project where you're engaging teams, creating your strategy, executing projects, kind of iterating off of those, and you're kind of having a 12-month or more roadmap to figure out if you're getting success from AI inside of your organization. So when we see folks come to us with use cases of, hey, this is going to completely transform our organization with AI, we try and guide them to something simpler where they can get earlier time to value. Because the reality is, if you pick two relatively large, robust, expensive, time-consuming projects, there's a real probability that both of them will fail because people are learning about AI. Most folks don't know how to use AI correctly. They don't understand what AI can do, what it can't do, what it's good at, what it's not good at. And so picking big projects are kind of making the assumption that you understand a lot of the starting line, and most folks don't. And so this kind of standard approach to enterprise projects doesn't really work for AI right now. And there's also a problem that's happened in terms of, and certainly technology companies over the past, in terms of something called shadow IT. So what shadow IT is the notion that lots of different functional groups inside of an organization create their own pods and silos of implementations that aren't necessarily coordinated. So different development groups will create instances inside of Amazon or Microsoft, or add a new SaaS tool so that the organization starts to have hundreds of tools and deployments of their kind of infrastructure, and it becomes a difficulty for management to deal with long term. So shadow IT, just meaning we have this diaspora of implementations, is an issue that tech firms have been dealing with, not even tech firms, tech divisions within firms for the last 15 years, since cloud really became a big thing. But this slide's extremely important, and I mentioned it earlier in terms of employees are already using AI, whether there's a corporate policy or not. This is the reality of the situation. So we call it shadow AI, kind of mirroring shadow IT, in which now the corporation has lost control over who's using what tools. They have no visibility into it. And so what's a natural kind of corporate reaction? The natural corporate reaction is let's just prohibit it. Lawyers say let's prohibit it. We're not comfortable with it. So like the kind of, this is a real kind of hot topic right now. And we certainly think that you need to do things to not ban this from employees, but essentially figure out how you can get it adopted as wide as possible across an organization. So we had a question. Lauren, did you see there was a question?
Ralph just said that he loves the phrasing of shadow IT and that it's a great concept.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So this is kind of as IT, as we look at IT from an organization. So the reality is this is kind of the mandates that IT has in terms of improving security. These are things that IT is already working on. Security of infrastructure, data quality and ease of access, extracting value from data. So those are things that are kind of mandates at the corporate level. But the reality is, okay, well, you already have a full backlog of stuff. How does AI fit into that? And is it just an additional thing we need to learn? Does it add additional data sets, and does it make it more difficult to access data? Does it decrease our company's security posture? So those are things that kind of an IT leader has to grapple with, and AI is just a kind of a new entrant into that mix. So taking all of that as background of kind of the current state of the world, the question is how do you become an AI empowered company? And AI empowered company, or even individual, is how do you get adoption of basic AI tooling kind of as wide across your organization as possible? So the reality is that a typical approach for AI currently is, again, give it to the smartest technical people in the company, have them come up with some interesting things that AI could potentially solve, and then try and kind of have that exposed to the organization through more of a halo effect. And it's not really the right order of operations. But in terms of being an AI empowered company, you want AI tools in the hands of all of your subject matter experts or business unit owners, because the people that actually understand the company are usually not the technicians. It's the folks that understand, oh, well, we have all of these processes in HR that are cumbersome. Are there ways that we can use AI to do that? And to empower them with basic AI tools so that they can use those tools to almost like copy and paste and figure out ways whether AI works to solve that problem that they're asking, or ways that AI maybe doesn't work to solve the problem. I'll give you an example from our company that we do a sales kickoff every year. So it's an annual event, pretty big. It's attended by everybody in the company, and we needed to craft breakout sessions for that. And the breakout sessions, which are smaller subset groups, they needed to include people from all the different geographies of our company. So we couldn't just include everybody from Indianapolis in the same breakout session because they all know each other. The questioning wouldn't be right. So we just took the spreadsheet of all of these people by their location and just told our AI tool, hey, could you resort this list based on these criteria, so that we have a mix of folks from different markets. And then there were a couple other criteria. 2 seconds later, it had a fully fleshed out list that was organized by like 6 breakout sessions, and it had the right kind of distribution of groups. But that's something like a person in HR was able to do. that they understood what that problem was, but a technician would never understand, oh, that's something that could save this person time. So the further you get that out in the organization, the better. And that all of the interesting use cases will start coming out of the people that are subject matter experts in the business, not necessarily subject matter experts in technology or AI. So it gives a nice little sandbox to test things out. And the reality is, by being an empowered company, you're going to find places where you can automate processes. The people that are using those processes currently are the ones that are going to give the suggestions. They won't necessarily be the technological implementers of that, but they could be like, hey, I've solved this problem manually via AI. Can we turn that into something that's automated so that I can, create a process? And then ultimately, you also have the ability to improve the experience of your customers by, sometimes it's just formalizing your communication with them. So just a couple of what ifs in terms of, giving support staff access to internal documentations for either onboarding or answering customer questions. What if you could get a comprehensive overview of the status of your clients? So like if you're doing a quarterly business review with them, you can get a dossier of information and have AI digest that and say, what are the strategic points we should be covering with them based on our experience in the last 90 days? What if you could increase the effectiveness of the sales team in terms of their prospecting by 10%? And, the notion of getting answers from data systems in minutes, also in a disintermediated fashion, so that you're able to, to make business decisions quicker. So there's a what ifs that AI can solve, but, can benefit to the organization. So the question then becomes, okay, how do you end up on the winning side? And our philosophy, or the thing that seems to be resonating out in the market, is we use the term crawl, walk, run. So it's important to do the basics and then build off of the basics, and then eventually get to your run phase where you're starting to implement AI in more of a transformational or very strategic sense in the company. We do find a lot of folks coming and wanting to go to the run phase of, I want to do all these great needle moving things with AI, but are you ready yet? Do you understand it? Have you used it yourself? Do you know what its limitations are? And so we really, at this point, are focusing a lot on the crawl phase. Let's get you to first base as opposed to like looking for home runs. So you need to execute in an order that accelerates incremental value, give people access to the AI, the best AI tools available, but in a way that conforms to your policy, use cases, security, all that type of stuff. You want another thing, this is a little bit further down for consideration, is that your data is distributed in a lot of different places. It's distributed on site, some of it's in the cloud, some of it's in SaaS apps. The notion is you want to try and figure out how to couple AI tools with data where it already exists, because otherwise you're going to be involved in a whole data moving and data processing kind of job before you're able to start extracting value out of AI. So the notion from the start is, hey, we want to tap into that data. How do we tap into it where it's at versus kind of creating a project? And you want to kind of simplify that through some sort of a curated AI framework. We look at like this is like an Eisenhower matrix. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but kind of prioritizing tasks. Now I'll flip through this relatively quickly, but the top left component of this is what are the things that you should be doing now? And some of you may have already done these things, but we found from surveys that a lot of this is not being completed. So you need to have an AI policy, and this can involve AI governing groups, task forces, legal teams, or whatever. But you need to have a policy, because that creates a dialogue inside of the company about where do you want to go. And the suggestion from like a board level or an owner level is start at an endpoint of, I want everybody to have access to the best AI tools in my company, and then kind of peel that back and say, well, maybe that's not possible right now. We need to kind of go through some stair steps, but have that as a first goal. But the secondary importance of that is you can have a policy, but a policy doesn't matter if you don't have the kind of technology to enforce that, so that you're ensured that you have conformance with that policy. And so that gets you to the point where you have the best tools in the hands of everyone, which will start the flywheel spinning on being an AI empowered workforce. Once your workforce has access to the tooling without any specific like guidance, like you have to use it for this, it's more of like, this is your personal assistant to then be able to help you in your day-to-day and to think first like, oh, this task that takes me a lot of time, I can use the tool to help me with that. Now I'm starting to understand, oh, it's just taken out of my year, it's saved me 100 hours of work. Great. Once you learn that as being part of an AI empowered workforce, now you're ready to go to the important but not urgent phase of how can I turn that into some sort of a business application? So now I, as a subject matter expert, have said, hey, this is going to save me 100 hours. We also have 10 people in our team doing the same processes. Now we can multiply that by 10 if we develop an internal app, and it save us 1,000 hours. 1,000 hours, you can do a calculation at an fully loaded labor rate of a certain individual, and see that it's a relatively large savings. Once you start working on that, getting some use cases done, then you'll go to the point where you're now going to connect it to internal data. But it's further down the road. There's a lot of value there, but you kind of have to have those first bases covered. So this is a core slide in terms of order matters. We find a lot of folks trying to go to step 3 right off the bat, which is I have all these use cases I want to use AI to solve in my business, but do you really understand AI? Do you have a policy in place? Do you have ability to eliminate shadow AI so that you know that everybody's using the same system and you have the right kind of technology control? So our suggestion to any company is to kind of stay in the use policy and the kind of tooling part of eliminating shadow AI before you get to use cases. Use cases will evolve from step 2 to step 3, but you can certainly try and go to step 3 first, and then it just becomes you have a lower probability of success. After you have some use cases, you can look at kind of connecting to data. And then depending on your industry, you might find that AI usage, these generative AI models, we need to keep those private. So if you're in like a finance, insurance, health, some sort of regulated sector, you're probably going to want to keep the AI tooling private to your company and not be exporting that kind of stuff out to the cloud. So I'll skip past that because we don't need all that detail right now. But here's some kind of components, and this is a little bit of an expedient slide, but a big survey of CIOs and CTOs about the kind of skill sets that are needed in the coming year. And you can see, if you kind of go down the titles, a lot of these are AI related and a lot of them are gaps in organizations. So the thought is if you don't have these skills internally, by giving everybody access to the tools, you'll start to organically develop some of these skill sets. You certainly won't build somebody who becomes an expert in generative AI or machine learning or data science internally to your company, but you can start to develop competencies over time. But it's just a survey of kind of where skills gaps are currently. Here's some stats from some research out there. So one stat I wanted to point out, we talked early about phase 1, which is establishing policy. And you can see that there's a stat here that 7% of people have established a policy, let alone had a way to enforce it. So very early in the game in terms of adopting these kind of generative AI tool sets. And so if you don't have one yet, don't be super concerned, because there are, you're in the majority, unfortunately. But that's kind of a couple different stats about what people are thinking about in terms of their own generative AI implementation. But another one that is a favorite of mine is just the KISS principle: keep it simple, stupid. There's a general kind of relationship or inverse relationship between the simplicity and the cost of a solution. So you want to try and keep your AI implementations as simple as possible. Give people the tooling, not trying to get the cart before the horse and develop these very complex use cases, because you're learning. And so try and keep that learning iteration as small as possible at the early part of generative AI implementation. Another component is, where is your data located, and can you couple AI to that data now? Or do you need to move that data somewhere else to get value out of it? And so there's kind of different ways to implement AI right now. One way is like with Amazon or Microsoft Azure, where you move all of your data to like the cloud, and then they have a bunch of AI tool sets that can interact with it. Our suggestion is you think about 2024, 2025 as a business. Your data exists in a whole bunch of places. You're not going to have the time or bandwidth to move all of that to a cloud location to get value. The question that you ask yourself is, how do I connect that AI brain, that large language model, to data where it lives now? So through connectors and transformation layers are kind of ways to do that. I'll give you a real quick implementation, just a use case that we've done internally, just to show you ROI. So we've developed all of the AI infrastructure, because we're an infrastructure company, underneath. So this is kind of like the step of building on top of that. So real simple. We give the AI chat tool system to everybody in our company. We have around 500 people, because we have the ability to enforce our AI policy. We have a bunch of audit logs and secure authentication and PII filter, a bunch of stuff on top of it that makes us feel that we're not going to leak private information and that we can responsibly give it to our organization. So this kind of implementation came out of that, where we gave this to, we have a technical support department of about 180 people, but the leadership of that department, when they were using the basic chat tool that we gave them, were like, hey, we would love to do executive and technical ticket summaries, so that when an issue escalates to, say, somewhere up the VP or even to the CEO, that they're able to get a really quick digest of potentially hundreds of interactions that have happened between the client or internal to the organization. So they can get like a one pager. It's like, hey, here's where it's at when I go talk to the client, so I'm aware. Additionally, on the technical summary side, as you do shift handoffs, there's a hot button issue that's escalated. Being able to kind of append the summary to the ticket so that the next person that picks it up can start from the ground running. So this is, something that we implemented that creates the, executive and technical summary. It's based off of generative AI. It's based off our infrastructure. So we created it. But the important part of this is the ROI aspect of it. And as I mentioned, this is probably in the walk phase, so not quite the crawl. Crawl phase is get everybody to have chat. This is the walk phase. But in the crawl phase, what happened is when those folks came to me, so I'm an AI expert, but I'm not an expert in how our technical support team works. They're like, hey, how do we do this? And I said, well, or can it do it? I said, well, just copy and paste out of the ticket system all of those details, put it into our chat, and tell our chat to summarize it as an executive. Okay, we had some tweaks back and forth with that. They were able to come up with something that we were able to turn into, this is a very lightweight, low-code application. But they were able to do that kind of iteration to see, can the AI system actually do this for me, before you get to the walk phase of let's go implement some sort of an application to start to automate this for our company. From the first person talking about this to me to us having this interface, this rough interface, it took about 2 hours. There's about 10 hours of back and forth of getting this thing tuned right, so we could say, is this the right way a technical summary should look? Is this the right way an executive summary should look? And it saved us about 2,400 hours a year in terms of shift handoffs and then executive escalations. So based on our kind of fully loaded labor rate, that's 12 hours of time invested to get $170,000 in annual savings. The important part of this is these use cases came out of AI enabling and AI empowering our organization, they would never have come out of the technical AI group, because we just don't know where all the pain points in the organization are. It's a good example of kind of crawl and then walk. So this being the walk phase, crawl phase giving everybody access. So, as you're looking at kind of implementing things, we've covered a bunch of these topics, but you want to try and empower all of your employees today with the tools. Start from that and figure out if that's possible in your organization, and then work your way back. Might not be possible in every organization for regulatory issues, comfort issues. Maybe you're just a more conservative organization on the kind of continuum scale, but that should be goal one, step one. How do we do it, and how do we make it as easy as possible? I mean, that's where the kind of crawl, walk, run. Let's go on the AI easy button. A little bit later, as you go down the path, now we're thinking about the real value of AI, which is once our employee base understands how to use it and is widely adopted, now how do we connect that to our proprietary and internal data sources to help kind of drive more information out of, or value out of kind of needle in the haystack type situations. Another point, though, which is a little bit nuanced, is it's very difficult to determine what exactly the right AI technology you should be using. Should you be using Google's Gemini or OpenAI, or should you be using Microsoft's Copilot? Is nebulous. The most important thing for the organization is don't put all of your eggs in one basket with a Microsoft or an Azure or an AWS or a Google, because the technology is changing so much. It could be in 6 months, Google ends up being the predominant one that everybody's using right now, happens to be OpenAI. So just the notion of don't, hedge your bets, I would say. And I always kind of summarize this out as this: everything that we're using right now is the worst possible AI we've ever seen or ever have used or will use. And so as next 6 months, it'll be extreme, or next 90 days, it'll be interesting to see what kind of new technologies come out. And I mention this every time, but I wanted to give you just a little visual of there's going to be a QR code at the end for an AI success kit. This isn't Expedient branded stuff. This is just get you up to speed, crawl, walk, run. What's the right way to kind of think about implementing AI in your organization? So these are some resources, some newsletters, and then some different reports about, like up there, Shadow AI or Microsoft's insights into the future of work and how AI integrates into that. It's stuff to, if you're even before the crawl phase, if you're just trying to get your arms around it, stuff to help you get up to speed quicker, so that you can start figuring out how to build a policy. And even we give examples of policies that you could implement for your organization as well. So what to remember: how do you decrease the time to value? And our suggestion would be try and get secure, responsible, ethical chat implemented as soon as possible across everyone in your organization. That's the way to extract maximum time to value. After that, now how do we bring AI to the data stores and data sources that we have in our organization, whether they're in the cloud, in SaaS applications, or maybe locally hosted? And then you got to start. So you got to crawl, walk, run. You can't go to run first. Just start. And even if you can't implement these tools across your organization, how do you even get a small group of people using them to become the champions, so that you can kind of build out from there? So I'll leave it at that. There's an AI success kit, just a website, and you can go download those resources, watch videos, all kinds of stuff. But it's nothing Expedient salesy. It's just like, this is intel that you need to kind of get your arms around things so you can get into the crawl, walk, run phase. So that's the presentation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brad.
Yep.
So he covered tons of ground. However, I'm sure we still have questions. So let's start with Chris. Chris is wondering, as a crawl or walk level, how secure are the environments within ChatGPT teams or enterprise account levels? And can that be brought to local data to interact?
So yeah, hard to say. So one thing is ChatGPT teams, it's somewhat expensive. I think it's like $30 a user a month. So that's like usually a thing people come up with. It's like, oh man, I have 10 employees, I've spent $300 a month. That's an issue. But in terms of the security, you are still sending that data out to the cloud, and they have like legal agreements that say we're not going to train off this data, and your data is not commingled with other enterprises' data. But the reality of the AI infrastructure that both OpenAI have and Microsoft by proxy, they don't create a copy of their entire AI infrastructure just for your company. So they have a policy that says they're not going to share any of this or train off of it. But the reality is, when you ask your question and somebody from Sherwin-Williams asks their question and somebody from XYZ company asks their question, they all go into the same cloud infrastructure. For some people, that's okay. For other people, like certainly in the highly regulated industries, like I've had a bunch of these conversations, we are not shipping that data to the cloud. So then what's how do you do it? There are ways that you can create private, completely dedicated AI instances so that only your company's data accesses them. Sherwin-Williams would never have access to any of that type of stuff. So that hasn't made its way to OpenAI or Microsoft or Google yet. It may in the future. That's a kind of common thing. The difficulty, though, is for them to stamp a version of their OpenAI infrastructure just for your company. It's the cost basis for them is tens of thousands of dollars to do that, let alone the management nightmare of having 5,000 different companies, each with their own little island. So then it becomes extremely cost prohibitive. So yeah, it's not, I would say, as private as maybe they represent it out to be.
Fair enough. Thank you, Brad. What
Mm-hmm.
other burning questions do you folks have about AI? Whether Brad covered it or not, he's your expert today on AI. So anything that comes to mind, now's a great time. You can raise your hand and we'll unmute you, or you can put your questions in the Q&A box. Give you a couple more minutes. I'm sure they're pouring through the AI success kit and no longer paying attention to the Q&A. That's all it is.
Or maybe
Awesome.
maybe I've somehow answered all of the questions or just created way too many other questions.
One or the other. One or the other. We actually do have a couple hands up.
Okay. Can we unmute them and have them ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Freddie, could I get a little help unmuting Zoe or Ralph?
Yeah, you just pick them and I'll unmute them one at a time.
Let's start with Zoe.
All right, can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Mhm.
All right, awesome. So Bradley, great presentation. I have a very, very basic question. So just because I'm a Google user, I
Mhm.
use Gemini a
Yeah.
lot. But why choose one, chat or AI tool over another? Like what's that determining factor? I haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah, and the reality long term is you might use multiple tools. So like for instance, you might use Google for a lot of things, but if you use Microsoft apps like PowerPoint and Excel, Microsoft has a built-in Copilot to those. So you might end up using multiple long term, but if just saying you were using one chat app, usually what it will come down to, assuming you're doing this for yourself, there's no corporate kind of mandate to use X or Y or Z. It's about the quality of the output. And so, like a year ago, a little less than a year ago, when you had two options in OpenAI's ChatGPT of 3.5 or 4 different versions, 4 was like order of magnitude better. But 3.5 was free. And so my suggestion to folks when that was kind of like the only game in town was pay the $20 a month and use 4. And so to me, it's like, if you already have a system you like, if you happen to be a Google user, Gemini Ultra is now as good as GPT-4. I don't know if Gemini Ultra is kind of widely available. The other Gemini, I forget what it's called, Pro, that one was good as 3.5, which is inferior. And so it's like, how do you get the best tool in your hands is kind of where I would make the decision, but Google's catching up. The other thing is Google may, like certain ones may allow you to use the tool, the highest end tool for free. So like knowing that right now OpenAI is the leader, Google may say, hey, I'm going to give everybody something that's as good as GPT-4 for free. I mean, $20 a month for, just depending on your situation, that could be a great reason to use that particular tool. But for chat, I think people kind of pick the one that integrates to the systems that they use right now. And so whether it's Microsoft or Google, and then if you don't want those, then you can kind of go to OpenAI. So that's how I would pick. Does that answer it well enough, Zoe?
It does. It does. But I have a follow-on question from what you just said. Do you see like maybe all these chat GPTs or whatever eventually merging? Because right now, like you have Google, you type in a question and it pops up, and that's pretty much the dominating, question and answering. Do you see that with AI, these tools merging eventually?
I don't know, like the big ones, like the ones Google's coming up with, the ones that Microsoft has, the ones that OpenAI has. I don't know that those ones are, and there's other companies, Anthropic, that compete with them. I don't know that they're ever going to merge for a couple of reasons. One reason is they have huge amounts invested directly into these systems that they feel are differential competitive advantages. And also currently in the US, our antitrust regulatory is extremely, they're paying extremely close attention to anything that might quell competition. Like the fact that OpenAI took a lead caused Google to have to catch up. I mean, Google is frankly one of the most anti-competitive companies I've ever seen. So the fact that these guys are fighting to give you a better product as a consumer seems to be the way the antitrust folks are going. So the big folks, I don't see as ever necessarily merging their technologies. But what might happen is maybe the smaller entrants, the folks that are worth $1 billion or something like that, they might get bought to kind of add product sets into some of the larger people. But yeah, I see them all as being separate. I don't see them all as like everything like coalescing to OpenAI in the next 5 years. And I think, in fact, there'll be hundreds of possibilities. You'll have your dominant ones, just like kind of like there's hundreds of web browsers. So you end up having the dominant ones because they give you a better experience as a user or as an enterprise.
Got it.
Great.
Thank you.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
folks. Next, we'll go over to Ralph, who has his hand up. Ralph, we will unmute you. So you should be able to now click your little microphone. There we go.
Are you able to hear me?
Gotcha.
Hi, I'd like to talk a little bit about teachers and education and the usage here, and also the issue of student usage of it. The philosophy for the student use is pretty much in my mind the same as letting them use calculators. It's just another tool, but you get a lot of pushback on that, and perhaps you could address that at some point. But then the other side of this is how education systems use AI as a tool. And I think there's a lot of interest there without a lot of answers.
Yeah. So I'm trying to find the URL. Okay. I'm gonna post this into chat. It won't be necessarily relevant to everybody, but there's a gentleman named Ethan Mollick, who is he's like a professor of entrepreneurship at the University of Pennsylvania, but he's taken a real deep AI bent. In fact, he presented at we have a marketing AI conference here in Cleveland every year. He presented there, which is where I heard about him. But he really focuses on AI's impact on the pedagogy of education. And so he has that kind of blog site, which is once every couple of weeks or something interesting he puts out, not necessarily education related, but there's a link to like a YouTube series that he and his wife did about how AI should integrate into education going forward. And he teases out points like, you want folk, it is in one way like a calculator, except in a calculator, it's always predetermined what the answers are. In this case, you can use AI to like answer tests for you. You can use AI to essentially shortcut your own learning. And so, as a cheat. So like you didn't actually master those things. AI's kind of knowledge mastered them. And so the way that he thinks about it, and since he's looking at it a little bit more on the collegiate level, there's a stress point, like at UPenn, about, hey, I'm a tenured professor. I've had 30 years of this format of this course. And the way that this course is formatted, it's formatted in a way that students can cheat at it with AI. And so a lot of Ethan's suggestions are, how do we flip the way that we educate so that we can understand that people are going to use AI. We want them to use AI, but we've ensured that they've mastered the concepts that we want them to come out of this course with. So at the collegiate level, there's a lot more probably of moving to in-person presentations. So as opposed to, hey, take home a test or do this or whatever, it's like you have to do this live and demonstrate mastery that way. He has a whole bunch of other examples that he goes through, but it's nascent. And there's fights inside of their organization about, well, now I'm going to have to redo my entire kind of syllabus for my course that I've done. That's going to happen. So we're going to have to assume everyone's going to use this. Frankly, as educational institutions, we should be teaching them how to use this tool because, I have a friend that works at Hawken. And I said, well, if you're looking at juniors and seniors, what's the greatest thing you could teach them? I don't know that it's physics or biology or chemistry or any of those things. It's how to master these tools effectively, which can then essentially, like, I've used these tools doing AI courses and using them as like a TA. So when I get stuck on a particular area where an instructor will say this, that, or the other, I might grasp 3 out of the 4 things that they said, but the 4th one, I'm lost. Like I'm not getting, I'll use AI to keep unraveling, keep peeling that onion back until I'm like, I feel that I understand that 4th point. This is huge.
When you mentioned, pardon me, when you mentioned the having to redo the syllabus, this is something I'd turn over to AI.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could definitely do those particular things too. But yeah, you're just gonna have to find a way that, assuming somebody's using AI for a lot of stuff, they're not taking a shortcut to mastery. They're using it to maybe help them get unstuck from things, and that's every particular area of instruction is going to have to look at it a different way. But the big part is, can we get endorsement at an educational level, like at a high school, that we want our students embracing this, we want them to use it a lot, and we're going to help them and educate them about AI in general, and then make sure our courses still deliver mastery. And so, I mean, that's a debate. Some schools are like, no ChatGPT, no AI, nothing like that. Does that answer it enough, Ralph?
I think it does. I'm gonna subscribe to that site, Mr. Mullick's, and see what I can get out of that also. Thank you for the link.
Yeah, and there's if you go on YouTube, the YouTube video series is actually really good. I was trying to find the URL, I just couldn't find it, but it should be linked off of that site.
I'll find it. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Ralph.
Thanks, gentlemen. Another question from William is any future predictions that will be game changers?
Yeah, I mean, prognosticating about something that changes on a daily basis is a very, it's a difficult spot to be. But if from a business perspective, things that folks are looking at is if you take a look at an organizational chart and kind of functional job roles, AI is going to start being an agent for different components of those job roles. It won't necessarily replace the human in that role, but it may replace 3 core processes that they do that happen to be extremely rote. Like, for example, on an accounts payable clerk, you have to review, say, like a very voluminous telecom bill every month to see what the outliers and what changed. It's like tedious work that you just have to do. Like, that's the process of manual review. That should be replaced by an AI agent. We're not quite there yet in terms of building these little, we'll almost call them like mini assistants to the knowledge worker. But as kind of things evolve over the next couple of years, I see people, once they get used to chat and being AI empowered, figuring out, oh, these are the things that kind of keep me from being as actualized and effective in my job, so I can concentrate on the high value things. There'll be a replacement of things with agencies. So that's one interesting kind of thing that's coming down the road, but we don't know exactly when. There's a lot of ifs and wherefores around that. Another one, though, is the fact that there's this, I don't know if bifurcation is the right word, but maybe competing interests in terms of the back-end AI brains. So we've talked about like OpenAI and this Microsoft stuff, Google stuff, Anthropic, these companies that have these, it's in the public sphere, but they're private models. Like no one has direct access to them. You access them through websites and all of that. They're owned by them. That's intellectual property. We also have folks like Facebook and a company out of France called Mistral who are putting out open source models. So anyone can download and modify that AI brain to do something relative to their company or to build a different type of business off of it. And so it's a philosophic difference. The private side folks are like, we want to control this. We're going to put all the guardrails around. And on the other side, you have more of a cowboy mentality of here it is, go do something with it. And it's and by do something, a high schooler with a laptop can download it and start modifying it and playing around with it. And so from an innovation perspective, I think a lot of great things will come out of the open source piece. But the caveat is there's not a lot of rules, guardrails, and barriers around it where there would be in the private side. So it'll be interesting to see in 2024, 2025, how that kind of private model versus open source evolves in terms of AI. And we'll be paying pretty close attention to that.
Thanks, Brad. We have one more question that we'll go over before we wrap up. Chris commented, there was a recent announcement about a localized AI, NVIDIA, where you can chat with RTX. Is your bet that this is a direction that will continue to happen?
Yeah, so I think that the kind of there's a couple pieces. So I think the private guys will always exist, like OpenAI and all of that will exist. But the notion long term, especially for businesses, is you can actually create localized AI that's better than any of the private AIs out there. It's kind of like giving it a PhD in your business, and it becomes very much an expert in that. But what happens is when you localize AI, it tends to like forget a lot of its general capabilities. So you start to have almost like employees. Like you wouldn't hire one employee that knows everything about your company. That's just not possible. You're going to hire somebody in the payables, receivables, hire somebody as CFO. So I think that concept of localizing AI, both from a security posture perspective, but also from being able to customize it. So downloading one of those open source models and customizing it to your organization. I think there'll be a huge blossoming of that, because then a company can say, hey, this isn't just AI, this is my AI. It knows my company and how we want to operate. So that will happen, but we're in the run phase. That's the, like people need to get the basics and crawl and then walk before they're ready to go to the run.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brad. Every time Brad presents, it's always new information, and it will continue to be that way. So his next AI webinar, our quarterly webinar, will be May 15th at the same time, 11:30 to 12:30. And I'm sure he'll have lots of new tidbits for you then as well. Our next general business webinar is on harnessing mobile apps for small business success. That is next week, Wednesday, February 21st at noon, and we hope to see you all there virtually. Thank you all so much for coming and spending a little time with us and with Brad today. Have a wonderful Valentine's Day, and we hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.